Good afternoon. I'm Plastics News Conference Director Joe Pryweller. We're glad to have you join us for the first in our ongoing series of Fireside Chats for 2018. These discussions are fueled by Holland Company and produced by Plastics News. We are proud to bring you this streaming event where you'll hear live, casual conversation with leading experts in the plastics industry. We're broadcasting this event via YouTube, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions in real time and receive on-air responses. We'll be using a new texting system to ask your questions via the Slido app. You can download Slido onto your phone or open it on your computer at www.slido.com. You will then type in the event code Fireside Chat. You'll be directed to a screen where you can ask your questions. Today, we're excited to discuss the wire and cable market with all of you. At one time, wire and cable was considered a niche specialized market. Now it has become a vital segment of the plastics industry that is expected to experience a rapid 16% annual growth rate over the next 6 years. Joining us to discuss this impressive growth and the industry shifts driving it are David Lindsay, Marketing Manager for Energy at Borealis, Paul Lorigan, Technical Director at T&T Marketing and Holland Company, and Dave Watson, Director of Engineering at Belden Alpha Wire. Our three industry professionals will share their insights on the latest trends, advancements, and opportunities in the wire and cable market, particularly for the plastics industry. They'll then turn their attention to define the strategies companies need to remain competitive in this vital market segment. Let me take a moment to share a bit more about each speaker's role in the wire and cable industry. David Lindsay brings his energy business knowledge to the wire and cable discussion and has been with a variety of electrical and cable companies before joining Borealis. Paul Lorigan of Holland Company is materials expert through and through and has also experienced creating new innovative materials when customers need something specific but it is unavailable elsewhere. Dave Watson of Belden Alpha Wire has extensive technical and engineering expertise in wire and cable and has been at the company since 1980. Allow me now to turn the conversation over to our three speakers. As a reminder, you can send in your questions via the text box on the Slido app or at slido.com by typing in the code Fireside Chat. We will reserve time at the end of the conversational phase of the webinar today to answer your questions in the order received. Let's lead off today's chat by discussing the phenomenal growth that is expected in the wire and cable market. Generally, I'd like to each ask of you about this from your vantage points. Starting with Paul Lorigan of Holland Company and T&T Marketing, can you share what is driving this growth in your respective businesses and particularly what end markets are responsible for it? Paul, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you, Joe. Yeah, certainly we're seeing growth in our sales right now. I think a lot of that could be the result of the weather that we've had as far as replacing wire and cable that happens from all these storms. But aside from that, we seem to be selling a lot of materials into the fiber optic market, a lot of tapes, a lot of filling compounds. That seems to be quite a hot segment for us right now.
Great. David, from Borealis' perspective, what are you seeing out there?
Thank you. I think the biggest influencer for us right now is the change in the generation mix in the utility sector. We're seeing retirement of old coal-fired power plants across the United States and the growth in renewables, wind in particular, but also solar, utility-scale solar farms, is really driving growth in the medium voltage and even low voltage sides of the energy business.
Great. And Dave Watson of Belden Alpha Wire. Dave, from your perspective as a manufacturer, what's going on?
Thanks, Joe. Our growth is pretty broad, but we're really seeing it spike a little bit is in China. The Chinese market for us has been very good growth and also just kind of broadly industrial robotics and that sort of market is just exceeding our expectations.
Great. Well, let me challenge you a little bit. I know that there's been a lot of change going on right now in the consumer marketplace as far as connected homes and connected vehicles, and also urbanization trend, more people moving to the cities from the country. Are some of these trends driving future opportunities in wire and cable? What growth trends are you expecting in the future, if anybody wants to tackle that one?
Yeah, from the urbanization standpoint, it's really impacting the distribution system that the big utility companies have in big urban city centers. There's a higher demand for electricity in the city center. which requires new medium voltage primary distribution as well as low voltage secondary distribution systems. And so there's a lot of replacement of existing infrastructure, having to remove old cables. This is true up and down the voltage range. And there's new technologies that are being looked at and new solutions to enable replacement of older infrastructure in the existing conduits, if you will, that are already under the street. And that is a big advantage if you can do that, because then you're not digging up the streets in a downtown urban area, which is incredibly expensive and disruptive.
Great.
Can I follow up on that
Please,
question?
Paul, go ahead.
Are you seeing some replacement of these old PILC cables, the paper lead cables? Is that happening now, or?
Yeah, so the PILC design is what we consider medium voltage, so in the 15 to 35 kV range. And replacement of that technology has been going on for a number of years.
Okay.
And that's been both EPR rubber insulated cables as well as now XLP cross-linked polyethylene cables are being used for that solution. And the real challenge that's in the marketplace right now is how do you do the same thing with the higher voltage transmission cables, which again is a paper insulated, has a dielectric fluid associated with it. And so it's an older technology, has some environmental issues. But if you can replace that cable in the existing pipe that's in the ground with a modern cross-linked polyethylene cable, there's a huge opportunity there.
Great.
Thanks.
And Dave, I know you talked a little bit about China. Are you seeing more of a push globally in this industry that's going to affect how we do business?
For us, it's where the contract manufacturing is going on. The contract manufacturing that's been traditionally in the States is more and more moving to China. So we're finding that our business is moving to China. So we've had to develop strategies so that when the business moves, when the manufacturing location moves, that our product is pulled through back into that market.
Great. And I imagine in China you're seeing more of the urbanization trend where a lot of these countries be more developed, people moving to the cities. Is that affecting how you're seeing things?
Not from our market. We're more medical electronics, industrial robotics, like automobile manufacturing. So for us, and we could be unique in that the urbanization. I think we might help in test equipment that's used in SCADA systems and things like that. But directly, that's we leave that to other guys.
Sure. Well, that makes sense, and we'll get into some of the connected vehicles and some of the other areas in a little bit. But last question, as we're talking about growth trends, you mentioned China. Are there other geographic regions in North America that seem to be primed for the most growth or most change as we're talking about this phenomenal growth rate we're expecting in wire and cable? Are there areas in the U.S. that are prime pockets for this?
Not so much from TNT marketing standpoint, but I'd say M. Holland's perspective is a company without borders. So there's a lot of development. You're looking to Latin America as well as Europe. So we're seeing some activity there, definitely.
Great.
I think for us, California is a hotbed. You've got a lot of medical device. You've got automobile manufacturers out there. Also in the Boston area, I think there are a lot of companies doing kind of groundbreaking work in miniature robotics. The Leopard or whatever it is that kind of runs at 60 miles an hour. Those sorts of applications seem to be kind of regionally targeted.
Okay. Well, let's move into the heart of the discussion today. We're going to get into a little bit on trends, quite a lot on trends actually, and what we're seeing out there and how we're reacting in the wire and cable industry to some of the trends, some of the macro trends that are going on. First one, obviously, are some of the environmental concerns that are around, and what we're seeing as far as cleaner type of materials, such as low smoke, non-halogen, and other kind of things, and also some of the other regulations that are going on, and how consumers are viewing this, and what areas are of big concern or cause most seismic shift, I guess, in wire and cable. I'll start with you, Paul, since
yeah, sure. So, I've been in wire and cable business since 1980. I've seen a lot of materials come and go. Some of these materials that I started working with back in 1980, things like chlorosulfonated polyethylene, chlorinated isoprene, chlorinated polyethylene, manufacturers stopped making them, really due to environmental concerns. So it became very difficult for people to source these materials to continue making mining machine cable or whatever cable they were making. So they had to look for alternatives, and that's caused some major shifts. And I don't see that stopping. I think that's going to continue definitely.
Yeah, for sure. From an energy standpoint, clean energy and some of the other areas from a regulatory environmental perspective that they're seeing that are going to cause some shifts in the industry?
Yeah, for us, I mean, we're a global supplier to the wire and cable business, and one of the big challenges that we see related to building materials and low smoke, zero halogen, as you've mentioned, is the difference between regions, geographies, countries around the world. There is no harmonization right now of building codes and what's required in one country versus another. And so there's a huge challenge right now to create products that meet specifications in Europe, for example, that also meet requirements in the United States and that are economical, that people can afford and use in their given application. So there's challenges around where you are in the world and trying to harmonize products for different applications.
Great. And Dave, from a manufacturer's perspective, you maybe take a different view with this. How are environmental concerns affecting your business?
Well, low smoke, zero hal is certainly the big one, and we see it from Europe. We have seen it for Europe for years, but even domestically, most of the products we've released recently are some form or version of a low smoke, zero hal, and it's just becoming our customers want to have kind of a single solution that they can use globally. So it may not be the most cost effective, but the bigger factor is being able to take a product and use it in the continent of Europe or in the United States or where have you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it depends where it is. Are consumers aware of some of these? Is there growing momentum in some areas for more of this kind of thing?
Yeah, from my standpoint, I don't know that it's consumer driven so much as OEM driven. If if you got your Xerox or Molex or whoever, you probably have a huge team of researchers looking at environmental regulations and health and safety, and I think that's driving, and the consumers are being the beneficiaries of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. They're aware of it anyway, but obviously companies seeing this as a need out there, and that they're going to be asked for more of this, I imagine, right? In a lot of cases. And one variant of environmental concerns is climate change. Obviously, whether science believe it or not, it probably is these days. There's a whole lot going on in climate change as far as weather changes. One area is just the fact in some of the Arctic areas where the polar ice caps are melting, some ships are able to get through where they weren't before, where rivers and oceans were frozen in a lot of cases, icebreakers getting through. How does that affect the industry with some of the climate change and some of the areas where wire and cables needed in sub-zero temperatures to get through in some cases? And I know, Paul, I think TNT and Holland have even some sub-zero temperature materials out there, right, for some of this?
Yeah, so certainly it's a demand that we're seeing. As you mentioned, with the polar ice caps melting, these ships are now passing through waters and environments that they were not in previously. So you can see temperatures of minus 80 C. And historically, the low temperature properties have been, say, minus 40 C has been the product that we would sell in the marketplace. So minus 80 C is quite a higher level of demand. And then one of the challenges of that is like, okay, so you can meet that property. You can do that fairly easily if you just have a very rubbery material without any flame retardant in it. Right, but if you wanted to do all the other things as well, if you want it to be flame retardant, you want it to have UV resistance, then all these properties are kind of balanced. And as you add flame retardant, that low temperature property falls off the edge of the table. So it's quite a challenge to keep all those properties balanced and meet that type of low temp performance.
So you have to have some that's temperature resistant in some cases to handle some of this?
Yeah, so I mean, the list is everybody would like to have everything, right? They would
right,
like it
of course. Wouldn't we all?
Yeah, to meet, these severe flame properties, also be supple at minus 80 C. So that is a challenge, and there's a lot of work being done in that area. It's encouraging. There's new materials, there's new cables. It's looking good, but there's still some challenges ahead to get these products that have that level of performance.
Is this just for something in the let's say negative 80 degrees Celsius, or does it work with other types of applications too?
Yeah, no, certainly everybody's looking for more and more performance from the materials, low temperature performance. I mean, to give you an example of why that's important, a lot of factories, they might be in Edmonton, Alberta, they might be in Minnesota, and you'll have these cables and trays in factories that power the equipment. They must be flame retardant. They can be kind of outdoors. So if the electrician's carrying a toolbox and he turns and he hits the tray of cables, you want those cables to stay in place and to not fracture. So that is, everybody kind of wants everything, flame retardancy, low temperature performance, UV, the whole bit.
Right. Dave, you were about to mention something.
I was going to ask Paul, do you see also that they're wanting high performance on the upper temperature end? Because I can envision some of these cables going into a miniaturization, a small control panel where the heat's generated and plus 60 might not cut it. They might need 90, 105, 125. Is that what you're
or
seeing?
150C, right? I mean, that's something we do see, at quite a low end, and then also we'd like it to, have a 150C rating on the high end.
Sign me up.
Technically, it's a big technical
Again,
challenge.
something for everybody,
definitely.
right?
Yeah, it definitely is.
And low hal.
Yeah.
And low smoke, zero halogen.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. We
yeah.
got extreme temperatures either way. It makes it more of a challenge, I would think.
Yes, sir. It
From that
does.
standpoint. And on the other end, we're seeing, obviously, we read the news, we see lots of natural disasters and hurricanes and wildfires and all sorts of snowstorms and inclement weather affecting lots of North America these days, at least this year. And whether that's a trend going forward, hard to say, but at least this year has been affected tremendously. These unfortunate events, have they affected the type of wire and cable that is being put out there, or how it's being used in some cases? David, do you want to start with that?
I wouldn't say it's as much the type of wiring cable as much as the drive to go underground versus overhead.
Okay.
So it's not really driving innovation in the cables themselves, but as far as the total market demand and volume requirements in the market for polyethylene specifically, there is a big demand change that's in progress right now, and I think a trend that will continue as communities demand more reliability. In this day and age, everybody wants power to be on all the time. And there's less tolerance and less acceptance to outages due to storms and weather. And then you've got critical infrastructure like hospitals that you can't afford to have out when trees take down a line. So I think there's certainly a trend, and there's going to be growth in the market for underground cable, where utilities are going to be putting more and more of their distribution and in some cases transmission underground, where it's been overhead cable or overhead wires in the past. Examples: Florida, Texas, California, New Jersey, and New York. Between the hurricanes that we've had from Superstorm Sandy to Florida last year, Texas last year, wildfires in California, mudslides in California. So there's a lot of natural disasters that have happened in the last 10 years. And the tolerance level of being without power for a week is going down. So I think we're going to see an impact in the market.
Oh, sure. That makes sense. I guess there's trade-offs. This is more expensive in some cases than overhead cables, but
if you look at it from purely a first cost, you really can't argue the fact that putting it underground is more expensive. And the materials are more expensive, and there's a little more labor involved to get it there.
Right.
But if you have to replace it even once, if it gets knocked down in its lifetime even one time, it's cheaper in the life cycle cost analysis to put it underground to begin with. So if you're in an area that's prone to those kinds of storms and outages, and it's a critical line that supplies a hospital or some other type of facility like that, it behooves you to take a really hard look at putting those assets and infrastructure underground.
Yeah, a lot of it's a one-time cost of installation, I would imagine, putting these things in, and then you have it that's more durable, going to last longer, going to weather the weather in some cases.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the amount of money that's spent to go in and do all the repair work after a hurricane is astronomical. And so if a lot of those lines have been put underground to begin with, one, everybody's back up and running quicker, but also the life cycle cost of that circuit is lower.
Not to mention your neighborhood looks a lot nicer.
Absolutely.
My neighborhood looks terrible. Overhead lines everywhere. And I thought, wow, this would be a beautiful neighborhood if we didn't have all these cables all going through the air here.
Yeah.
Well, and there's danger if a cable is knocked down in a storm too, and then
Seems like
Be
it's
careful.
every week this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I mean, there's always the debate of who pays for it, right? Somebody's got to pay the bill to put all that underground. But
It's true.
At the end of the day, everybody wants their lights to stay on. They
Yeah.
want to stay connected to Facebook and everything else that they're looking at.
Yeah, whether it's communities or institutions like a hospital or university or something else, is that where you're seeing most of this coming from as far as funding it?
Well, typically the cost gets spread into the utility rate base, and so
okay.
everybody ends up paying.
Everybody pays it, okay.
But the public utility commissions and the utilities try to take the most economical approach to keep power bills down, which is
Sure.
what everybody would like, just to have the cheapest electricity possible.
Well, sure. Well, because there's commissions and consumer committees that look at this and say, well, the price can't go up too much, I guess, for utilities. Since it's a public utility in some cases anyway, so there's a trade-off there, I imagine, somewhat.
Yeah, but
I don't think my utility got that message.
Oh, okay. We'll have to pass that on.
Every month's quite high. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the performance of underground systems versus overhead systems and things like hurricanes, there's a lot of data and evidence out there to validate that the underground systems are more reliable and more resilient
Right.
and faster to recover after those types of events.
And from a material standpoint, that behooves the use of polyethylene, I imagine, as opposed to PVC in some cases, right? We're looking at
Well, in
for the
this case,
insulation.
you're talking bare wire versus wire insulated with semicons and polyethylene or EPR.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, most of that would be a cross-linked polyethylene is the material we'd be talking about.
Right.
That would be your favorite, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, yeah.
And moving on from that too, we're talking about clean energy sources too these days, renewable energy, things like wind and solar power, and some of that seems to be gaining some momentum. I guess David, you could probably answer that too from an energy perspective. Are we seeing a shift in some cases to some of these renewable sources of energy?
Yeah, absolutely. The growth in wind has been tremendous the last 5 years or so in the United States. I think we're up to about 90 gigawatts worth of installed wind capacity in the U.S. 2017 saw, I believe it's about 7 gigawatts get added to the system. So these are big wind farms. A lot of infrastructure has to get put in to support that. There's a lot of medium voltage cable that goes into a wind farm. And we're seeing impacts in our business as well as for the wire and cable manufacturers themselves to supply the required cable for these big wind farms.
How does that differ? Give you examples of how the wire and cable differs using these renewable sources than you would be using a traditional energy source for wire and cable?
So if you use the analogy of wind versus a coal-fired power plant, right? So you have one big plant in a given location that's typically connected through overhead lines into the transmission system. And we're seeing retirement of a lot of fossil plants, coal plants across the United States. The wind that gets built is generally in remote locations. The strongest wind resources in the U.S. are in the Midwest. So there's a lot of wind getting built from Texas north in the middle part of the United States, but you got to get that electricity to market.
Sure.
So one, you've got the underground cable that connects all the wind farms and wind turbines in the wind farm, and then it has to get connected into the transmission system. So we're seeing infrastructure build associated with the bare overhead transmission. In some cases, there's some underground transmission associated with that. So it impacts a number of different things, from medium voltage cable for the collection system in the farm itself, as well as the transmission and distribution grid.
Yeah.
It's a lot of cable, a lot of geography you're covering with those wind farms.
It is.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of growth right now in solar, utility scale solar farms. There's solar on rooftop, but we're seeing bigger and bigger utility scale solar farms. The impact there is more on low voltage because it's the wiring harness and the collection system for all those small panels that have to get connected. There's a little bit of medium voltage cable in those type of projects. But the bigger impact is a low voltage design that's a cross-linked polyethylene again that has a lot of flame retardant requirements, UV requirements, temperature requirements, as you can imagine, with something that's going to sit and bake in the sun over its lifetime.
You see this in the manufacturing perspective, I guess, Dave? Is there anything for renewables or for different types of needs?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love wind turbines because if you look inside the wind turbine itself, there's a ton of subsystems. You know, it's sensing where the wind's coming from, and it's regulating the turbine or the generation itself, raising the output, lowering the output with demand. So, from my perspective, not getting involved in the lower medium voltage cables, just even discrete wires that go into these units is a good industry that's growing and expanding. And while it's a little more temperature controlled, being in an enclosure, it's still 100 feet in the air, whatever. So it's still has to be thoughtfully designed and thoughtfully manufactured with the right materials.
Oh, sure.
Which
Yeah,
are
yeah.
again, they don't want an acid gas fire to trash everything in the turbine. So again, we're back to wanting most of the things low smoke, zero HAL.
Has the customer mix changed a little bit? I know you've got investor-owned utilities or IOUs, and you also have third-party developers that are looking at some of this opposed to straight utility companies. Does that change the paradigm any with what you're doing?
Not for us, because the people that you mentioned are buying the turbine assembly from GE Wind or whoever. So that's my supply chains going to the actual manufacturer of the turbine, and it's other contractors and third-party utilities that are assembling the farms.
Yeah, the third-party developers are help driving the overall market trend and growth rate. I don't know that the traditional utility companies could build it fast enough to keep up with the demand.
Probably not.
So you get a lot of developers and investors that are engaged in the market of building wind farms. And the demand is coming not just from the general public who wants to buy green electricity, if you will, but you've got the big industrials in the United States, the Googles, the Apples, the General Motors, that want to buy green power to run their factories and their facilities and their data centers. And so they're signing power purchase agreements with the developers to say, if you build this wind farm, I'm going to buy the electricity for 10 years or 20 years. And so with that type of play in the market, there's a demand, and you get people besides just traditional utilities that will enter the market and build the wind farm and sell the electricity to private companies.
Interesting. It's interesting that Google and Apple and some of the tech companies are involved in this too, I guess, that we wouldn't
Yeah, I
have
mean,
seen in the past, right?
Yeah, Google, Apple, Amazon, General Motors. There's quite a few big names household names that you would recognize as being engaged in the renewable energy markets.
Interesting.
There did seem to be one product change or problem that I kind of came across in the wind farms, and that had to do with cable failures from torsion. Apparently, there's twisting inside the tower of the cables, and so there's been some failures. I'm not sure the mechanism of failure or how you solve it, but it was something I came across as a new requirement for these cables.
Yeah, abrasion resistance is part of that, because the turbine's swinging in the wind, right, to catch the direction of the wind. So if you've got the power cables or control cables coming down the body of the tower, then that you have to account for that mechanical freedom that has to be there, and it abrades, and just it's we're very experienced in flex cables, like from a C-Track or a Tic-Tac, that the dynamics of the number of degrees of torsion over what distance, and again, you're 100 feet in the air. Is it minus 40? Some of those mountaintops in Ohio, where I've driven by and seen the farms, can get pretty cold in the winter. So there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Let's move a little bit over to another trend, and that's the use of high-speed data networks. 5G obviously is coming into play at the moment. We'll get to 6 or 7 probably in a few years, not too much further down the road. And that means a change in towers and the height of the towers and the technology involved in building these towers to be able to transmit to more homes and give them the speed they want anyway. How does that affect the wire and cable industry? I know David and Dave, you've both dealt with some of this anyway.
Yeah, so 5G, you mentioned, as that gets built out, there's going to be new towers constructed, as you mentioned, but the density of the towers is going to get higher. So there are more towers and closer together, and they all need to be wired. In the past, there's been a lot of coax that goes to cell phone towers. Now it's all fiber. So there's demand in the fiber market associated with the 5G networks that are going to be rolled out. So growth there, growth in connection to the home. Fiber to the home is certainly a hot topic in a lot of communities these days. And so homes that used to be connected through twisted pair telephone wire or coax for their internet and television and other services now have fiber. And so there's certain cities that it's being rolled out across the country, and a lot of new fiber is being laid.
Well, let's move on with that, and that's another big topic outside of some of the environmental and telecom kind of a topic is miniaturization. We're seeing some of this in something that's lower gauge material, I guess, anyway, but it gives you high performance at the same time. I know, Dave, you've worked a lot in the medical device industry with miniaturization. What are you seeing out there as far as that goes?
Well, it's really kind of a broad trend. Anything from your ubiquitous Category 5 cable starts out at 24 gauge, and then we see requests for 26 gauge and 28 gauge and even smaller. In medical electronics, like for ultrasounds, they bundle coaxes frequently, and we're producing coaxes down to 50 gauge as a center conductor.
Wow!
And you don't see 24-inch reels in the factory when doing that.
Right.
But you get into problems like, how do you even properly terminate this thing that's hair thin so you can get an accurate impedance reading on it? So it's not just having smaller equipment with finer capabilities. There's all sorts of other things that you have to think about to be able to properly characterize and test the product. But the demand is certainly there. Everyone wants a smaller package.
But there are design challenges that go along with it, I guess.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah,
as you
certainly
said
from a
originally.
material standpoint,
Yeah.
as you might imagine, the material has to be very clean, right? As
Oh,
the
yeah.
wall thicknesses get that thin,
yeah.
and you can't afford any contamination or undispersed material.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
for
got
sure,
to
medical,
get
yeah.
real thin walls, and
Yeah.
we're moving away from copper. Copper's not strong enough at that size to have tensile strength to survive the manufacturing process. So now you're getting into alloys that have to be ROAS compliant. In the past, there was ingredients in the alloy to strengthen it that we can't use anymore. So all that becomes challenging.
Great.
Interesting.
The other area I touched on very briefly when we opened up the conversation was the connected vehicle. We're talking about both electric vehicles, in some cases hybrids, and also talking about smart interiors where everything is touch screen and being able to use from your dashboard to drive the vehicle. How is that affecting wire and cable industry and what you're doing in some of your areas? I know, again, Dave, you've done a lot of work in that area, haven't you, in automotive?
Most of our work in automotive has been in the manufacturing side and the plants, but just one of our market niches is supplying semiconductor manufacturers. So any time you've got more processing power, whether it's when you go back to the 5G, to take advantage of a 5G cell tower, I got to buy a new cell phone.
Right.
So if I'm putting touch screens in the car, that means there's more semiconductors, there's more microprocessors in the car. So that's really supporting the industry in a good sort of way.
You see much from materials perspective in that area, Paul?
No, basically, I think materials have not changed that much for automotive, but we are seeing some new materials that have some potential application, I would say, in miniaturization. And these applications in vehicles, it's kind of early days for those materials coming in. Some of the metallocene type materials show some great promise, but have not really been implemented yet, as far as I know.
Still being tested in some cases.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with wire and cable. It's bringing something new is 2 years, I would say. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah,
It's bringing something forward. It's like, there's no sales for 2 years while it's qualified. It takes time.
It takes time. You want it to work. So
A lot of testing.
that's important. Testing is key. How about from Borealis' perspective with automotive? Are there anything you're seeing with polyethylene or other areas that are being involved in some of these advanced vehicles that are on the market?
So we see automotive as a market that is continuously changing, right? The requirements in the vehicles, all the electronics that are being inside the cabin now, and we see the trend from gasoline powered to hybrids to pure electric vehicles.
Right.
So the requirements under the hood change as well, from temperature and performance and just the volume of wire in general changes as you look at the different power plant technologies that's in the car. There's a trend there for miniaturization as well. They want the wires to go smaller and smaller. You think the efficiency on an electric vehicle is all about the weight, right? How much weight does that battery system have to carry around? So if they can take the weight out of the wire that's in the car by going to thinner insulations, that's one of the things that's being looked at. So we're looking at developing technology to be able to do thinner and thinner walls. as the requirements change from the manufacturers. We're introducing thermoplastic materials that meet the same requirements as used to be achieved with thermoset materials, cross-links, which makes the processing easier for the cable manufacturer because it's a thermoplastic versus a thermoset.
Great.
So there's a lot of things that we're looking at to try and meet the demands in that changing market.
Okay. Well, let's go back to another, I guess, elephant in the room is regulation, and we talked a little bit about up front about what's going on in different areas, but also I want to talk about some of the challenges involved in the industry and how you're addressing some of this. I know there's some areas such as just education and what's out there, and some of the new requirements and what's happening. Paul, I know you've dealt a little bit with that. What from the aspect of what's coming out there and what consumers are seeing and what the companies are asking for? What are you seeing out there?
I mean, certainly to be prepared, it's good to be informed as far as what's coming down the road from REACH, from RoHS. I mean, halogens seem like that their usage is decreasing. Still the largest polymer PVC used in our market. But I mean, I think it's coming, and I think it's best to be prepared. For example, when RoHS came out, that legislation eliminated a ubiquitous flame retardant that we use, decabromo diphenyl oxide. I mean, we knew that was kind of coming, but a lot of people had their heads in the sand about it, and we're not really dealing with it. So actually at TNT, we qualified an alternative, and it was a little bit difficult to get people to run it, to test it, to qualify it, but they did. And so when the day came when all of a sudden it's like, we can't use this anymore, the suppliers are not going to make it anymore, there was an answer, and we were prepared for it. And so I think you're going to see more of this. I mean, whether it's phthalates in PVC or brominated flame retardants. Just this past couple weeks, there was a chlorinated flame retardant. Again, it was one of the solutions for DECA that we implemented that was put on the list as well. So that one's gone. So staying informed and doing the work ahead of time, I think, is what's going to keep you competitive and make it so you don't lose sales.
Right. Is there some education that needs to be done from consumer end so there's not panic over you don't want lead, we don't want these chemical additives in our materials, those kind of things? That is there something to tell people to take a breath a little bit with this?
Well, there's a lot of influences at play in the market. The consumer themselves, I don't think. I mean, you're buying items that have the wire and cable in them. So, I mean, I think this is mainly driven by legislation.
Out of Europe in a lot of cases, right?
The other thing is also there are organizations that are kind of lobbying to protect their current chemicals that are like the bromine industry, for instance. I mean, bromine's legitimate, flame retardant. It works very well. Right. It also makes thick black smoke and hydrogen bromide when it burns, but it does work very well, So there's competing interests. It's a bit political, I would say, So, but yeah, educating people on what's. I mean, I know as a person who has mixed these materials, who's burned them, who's seen them in use. I know which materials I would rather deal with day in and day out, how I feel at the end of the day if I mix these materials, if I burn these materials, versus the new materials, which are low smoke, zero hal. It's the right thing to do. I mean, I believe in the cause of moving that forward.
Well, I was going to ask that from your perspective. Are you seeing opportunities there? Because there's obviously with the lead directive, the RoHS stuff, the REACH legislation, some of the other information, some of the other regulations in California and other places. I know there are challenges in some cases. You got stringent requirements from underwriters, laboratories, and others. Are there opportunities in this area too that you could look at?
Well, I think it's a challenge, right? Because as a manufacturer, I have to be committed to what the market wants, and we still have a great market for PVC insulated jacketed products. At the same time, I can't turn my back on the Europeans and the folks, the Googles and the Apples who want low smoke, zero hal products. So I've got to do it all, and at the same time, there's kind of this cottage industry that's grown up that I think probably all three of us have to deal with, where people want all these reports. I want this declaration list of all the ingredients that are in your product, so I can screen against my 200 substance list of stuff that I'm restricting or prohibiting or declaring. So it's creating a ton of overhead that we have to find time
Agreed.
and resources to
Agreed,
do.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely takes some investment and some time investment too, as much as financial investment, I would guess. We only have a few more minutes before we get to questions, so let's wrap up by talking about how to stay competitive in this industry from your perspectives. I know you have to worry about economies of scale and speed to market and some other things. Are there some areas that you're looking at in order to be able to stay up to date and competitive with all the changes going on, especially that we've talked about today? Maybe Dave, since you're dealing with manufacturing perspective, what are you seeing out there as far as that goes?
Well, where my company is very ingrained in lean enterprise, we really take it seriously. We have Kaizen events that are very focused. I've got a big 50-inch cabler, and I want to reduce the setup time because I need to get more throughput out because the demand's up. So lean manufacturing is big for us. A while back, we acquired a company because it was synergistic for our medical market, and what that did was it allowed us to grow kind of incrementally, not so big that it was like two equals coming in and you tripped over each other trying to figure out who was in charge. But for us, it really helped kind of the sum was greater than the two parts being put together. So that was helpful for our efficiency.
Sure. David?
Yeah, I think certainly efficiency, any company that manufactures anything, efficiency is a big part of your bottom line. But paying attention to market trends, where things are going, we've talked about opportunities being created by environmental regulation that's constantly changing. We have to pay attention to Europe as well as North America, South America, the rest of the world. And so having people the right people in the right place to see what the trends are and being plugged into those markets to understand what's changing and when, so that we can be proactive in our development and innovation for new products, I think is how Borealis has stayed a market leader in this area.
Great. And from TNT's perspective?
Yeah, certainly I see a lot of benefit in seeing how the products are used, understanding that well and taking that all the way back to the design stage to see how the manufacturer runs the product, to how it's used in situ. So that's very powerful dynamic to understand all the aspects of the product development. The other thing I would say is the young people coming out of engineering colleges these days are amazing. The way we learn has changed dramatically. The young engineers and scientists today are so bright. They access information much quicker than my generation did, and bringing them into play and letting them apply their technology and creativity can really up the progress and speed things up amazingly. So I've been fortunate to work with some interns from universities in our areas, and I tell you, they're amazing students and people. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're talking about innovation, you get fresh ideas sometimes from some of the younger generation that might bring a different way of looking at things, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. That's at this point. I think we'll break, and we have a ton of audience questions. Again, if you haven't already, you can download the Slido app on your phone and type in the code Fireside Chat, all one word, or go to your computer on the website, slido.com, and do the same thing. Type in Fireside Chat and ask away. But there's a bunch of questions already that we'll get to here. First question we have: what are the growth of polyethylene for non-halogen compounds in wire and cable? And what specific high growth applications are there in this area? Maybe that's a good question for you, Paul, to begin with.
Yeah, so currently in the U.S. still the low smoke zero hal demand is still quite low compared to Europe. It's like about 1.4% of the total polymers are low smoke zero hal, so still a narrow niche compared to Europe, which is closer to 15%. However, the universities, hospitals, electric vehicles, so some niche applications seem to be leading the charge. And I think eventually we'll see pressure from Europe. So it is one of those scenarios where we see a lot of people qualifying and testing it, but not much sales currently.
I agree completely.
I imagine it's coming.
Yeah. I think Europe has, as Paul has mentioned, is ahead of the United States and North America right now on regulations requiring low smoke zero halogen for building materials. But it's coming. It's just a matter of when that freight train starts rolling.
Right, but it will.
Yeah.
What specific sub-segments are you seeing in the wire and cable market are you betting most heavily on? What areas are I know it's kind of a loaded question, but is there anything specifically that you bet on for growth in this area for sub-segments in the marketplace? Anybody want to tackle that?
I guess for us, the medium and high voltage utility markets, we've seen a lot of big growth there in recent years, and we think that growth will continue. Renewable energy has played a big part of that, and I don't think that trend is going to change anytime soon. There's strong demand still for wind and solar, and that changes the infrastructure demand. And then I think the electrification of the automotive industry is going to be another big driver for change in our industry.
Sounds like it. So this is more of a specific question. Wants to know with weathering testing, how long does it take to actually test a new product? What's the timeline for some of that? Is that an important part of this whole,
Well, it can vary. For a UL standard test, they have a 300-hour test for sunlight resistance and a 720-hour test for sunlight resistance. A lot of the other tests, oil resistance is much shorter in duration. If you're making an insulation system, you have to deal with wet IR, then that's anybody's guess how long that can take. So you're probably talking, 3-6 months at a minimum if it's a brand new polymer that you don't have a lot of experience with.
depending on the environment and the needs out there, I imagine, with some of this. How about insulation and jacketing? Question here is, what are the current unmet needs in that area, and what areas of improvement do you see in insulation and jacketing for wire and cable?
Oh boy.
I guess I'll
Whoever wants to tackle that one.
Yeah, so if you look at the trend in power cable, medium voltage starts for us at 15 kV here in the United States, and the trend is for the voltage levels to continue to go higher and higher and higher. We've recently had the first 500 kV underground cable installed in the United States. Went into service about a little over a year ago in California. 500 kV has been something that's been in other parts of the world before the United States. We were kind of a laggard in that regard. But I think if you look at what's happened globally in what we call extra high voltage cable market, when you're looking at 300, 400, 500 kV, the numbers just keep getting bigger and bigger. And so I think as you look to the future, there's going to have to be higher and higher voltage cables. We have 765 overhead. At some point, there's going to be a need for a 765 underground cable.
Wow.
When that's going to happen, I don't know. But globally, the trend is for higher and higher voltages. There's 640 kV qualified HVDC cable now. So again, whether you're talking AC or DC, the trend is for higher and higher voltages, which means newer materials, cleaner materials, higher performance. So I think it's just a matter of time before we get there.
Great. This might go back to what we talked about with some of the stringent requirements and UL and some of the other companies, other certifying groups demanding this. How do you see the technical requirements evolving, and what implications will it have on the marketplace as they continue to evolve the requirements in wire and cable?
Well, we were talking earlier, and kind of it's there's such a difference in thinking between Europe and the States. I was going to say this in the earlier question. What are we looking for in installations of jacket? My problem is that I've got people who want to use it domestically, and they want to have an FT4 type flame rating on it, and they also want to have it low smoke, zero HAL and used in Europe. And you can speak to this more articulately than I can, Paul. But to have something that's olefin based and meet a flame test like FT4, which they don't have in Europe. They don't have an analog to the flame test. Their hierarchy of flame test is much less rigorous. So that's a continual challenge for at least for me these days.
Yes, I mean, certainly a little plug for Borealis here. One of the challenges has been to have the wet electrical properties of a low smoke, zero HAL product, and Borealis brought forward a 90C wet product that meets horizontal flame. Great. It's not vertical, but that's a big step in the right direction toward a low smoke, zero HAL that will have the wet electrical properties to match the halogens and the tray cables and all that everybody's looking for. So that was a major development, I thought, that advanced the industry.
Yeah, and we're continuing to try and push that technology. I mean, we want to be able to meet the vertical flame as well as the horizontal. And it's like we've talked about, a balancing act of all these different properties. U.S. standards have always focused more on flammability, whereas European standards have always focused more on smoke generation and toxicity, which is, those two things don't necessarily move in the same direction. They compete with each other when you're trying to create insulation materials to meet all of those requirements.
Here's a question about mineral fillers. Do they play a role in the growth of wire and cable consumption? And are the levels increasing or decreasing in product formulations? What trends are you seeing in mineral fillers that we could discuss?
Yeah, so did you guys want to have a run at that? No?
Any of you?
So when the question is mineral fillers, I assume they mean flame retardant minerals such as aluminum trihydrate or magnesium dihydroxide,
Could
right?
be. Talking about filler loading levels too. In some of
Right,
these,
so in
probably.
order to meet the flame test, say a vertical wire flame test, you're looking at 70% of, roughly 70% of these types of fillers, so there's not much polymer there. So you have a
Right.
material with very little elongation. It's not going to do very well at minus 80 C that we were talking about earlier, so that's a challenge. There are new low smoke, zero hal products coming out that are phosphorus based with foaming agents, and that's been quite a nice advancement as well. Are they quite there for every application? They'll work in certain ones, but say for instance, if you go to a Steiner tunnel test where everything's kind of enclosed, the UL E84, halogens still rule that one as far as passing that test. So that's a lot of work the flame retardant people are doing, is trying to find a material that will work in the gas phase mechanism of flame retardancy to solve that problem. So they're quite active in that right now.
Great. Paul, here's a question that's probably more addressed to you, I would think. Are additive suppliers and wire manufacturers' relationships evolving in the industry? Is there collaboration going on from a technical standpoint? Is it becoming more prominent than it had been in the past?
I would say wire and cable is still quite a niche market. So most companies that would supply, flame retardants or polymers would do wire and cable too.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
not
just
one or the other.
Yeah, compared to the other markets that are out there, it's not big enough to build a plant to supply, typically. So it's, so the answer I guess would be no, probably. Right?
Okay. Not much there to talk about. Underground testing. This question probably for David here.
Yeah.
Does underground wiring require flame retardants or any thermal protection additives with it?
No, so if you're talking about the kind of cable that utilities would use in cities, distribution cables, for example, there really aren't flame retardant requirements there. The one exception to that I can think of is in some big cities and in some applications, cables will get installed in tunnels that would have pedestrian access or people access, worker access. And then there's tunnels that, for trains and that type of thing, where cables are installed in the same tunnel as the train would travel. And they do have some flammability requirements there, and you get into flame retardant jackets for the power cables. And these can be transmission cables at 400 kV, and they would have a flame retardant jacket associated with them. But the standard everyday underground cables, whether it's a 600 volt cable coming to your house or the 15 kV cable that the utility would install, no, there's not really any flame retardant requirements there.
Okay. Question about rising energy prices. We always see that at the pump too, and gas prices and other areas. Mm-hmm. Are rising energy prices having an effect on wire and cable manufacturers? And how is this being coped with in your area? I got either David or Dave could probably talk about this, or both of you, I would think.
Need my financial controller here.
Yeah, let's call him up.
Yeah. I'll start. I guess for our situation, we to some extent we have to roll with the punches. I think we're maybe a bit more sensitive to copper price than energy, but it's just one of those things that you have to deal with as it goes up and as it goes down. I don't have a more articulate answer than that.
Yeah,
it's cyclical, I imagine.
Yeah,
it is cyclical. It impacts your production costs. It impacts the cost of your material that you're selling, the product that you're making, and you just have to be able to track it and understand what your true cost is, and make and sell a product without losing money.
This isn't something that what came as a surprise or that you don't expect. You predict these kind of things, I imagine, you're modeling in some cases?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in general, it's going to be the same for everybody, right? So it's probably transportation, right? Getting the wire and cable from point A to point B, whether by truck or by train, right? I mean,
And raw
and
materials, too.
it's a level
Right.
playing field there.
Right.
Yeah.
All the same. I think I'll end with one last question. We didn't really get into acquisitions. I know there's been a lot going on in the industry. Alpha's even done a few where larger companies are buying up mid-sized and smaller ones, and it's changing the landscape a little bit. How's that affecting you both from a manufacturing and supplier standpoint as far as all the shifts in the industry as far as big companies getting bigger these days?
Well, for us, it impacts relationships. As companies acquire and get absorbed by another company, you may have a relationship with either the smaller or the bigger company. And so you just need to have an ear to the market and what's going on and manage those relationships. Hopefully you're on the winning side of that merger and acquisition as from a supplier standpoint.
So you hope your contact is still there, right?
Right, yeah.
Right.
But
Right.
it does impact the relationships in the market and your customers.
I think for smaller manufacturers, there's a potential opportunity, at least imperceptibly. You think of a bigger company, the bigger the company gets, the slower they move, the slower they are to react, the further they are from their end customers. So for those of us who aren't maybe so large, that we stay nimble on our feet and hungry, in that if a company doubles in size through a merger, that they're probably going to have a growth period where they kind of try to assimilate everything and get it figured out. And I think that could leave some opportunity for other competitors.
Interesting. Anything you, Paul, if you've seen out there that affects what you're doing from a material standpoint?
Well, certainly the relationship part is important for us as well, and being a distributor. So as these companies get larger, it might be a tendency for them to buy direct from manufacturers, where some of the companies that were bought were previously buying from distribution. So we've got to be good. We have to offer some value add to maintain our place and grow our place. So we do that by trying to take the complexity out of the buying process.
Exactly. Well, this goes back to the staying competitive portion we talked about too, I guess, where you can't just rely on your relationships you've had or companies you worked in the past. You have to be good at what you do, I guess, anyway. In case
Absolutely.
and
You better be.
agile, I guess, is the
Somebody's gonna
key
be.
word, right? Agility is important with this market, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. With that, I think we'll wrap up for today. Lots of great questions, and I learned a lot myself about this industry. We went through a lot of trends. There's a lot of changes going on, and great to have point of view of an energy from a company dealing with energy and polyethylene, somebody in materials, and also somebody in manufacturing. So it's great to have all three together. And I guess I should finish by asking if there's any final comments that any of you want to make as far as the industry changes you're expecting in the future, or what you're seeing, or anything you're looking for in the future, I guess, with the industry. Is there anything else, anything you want to mention as sort of a final wrap-up comment about what's going on out there?
Yeah, I would say, I'd recommend, staying informed and applying technology to solutions, trying to get people aligned to work together, deal with the problems and be light on your feet.
Good. David?
Yeah, I would agree. You have to stay nimble in this market. Things are always changing. It's a growing market, both the power side of the business as well as automotive and renewables and data. And the entire industry is ever changing. So you have to stay nimble and move with it.
And it's changing in complex ways because you've got regional differences and
Right.
cultural differences, and all that just makes that work need to be more serious and time consuming.
Absolutely.
Fun area of business to be in. Lots of change, lots of
Oh, yeah.
opportunity too, it sounds like, because it is so dynamic, right?
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be in wire and cable.
Absolutely. Well, great. Our time is up for today. I want to thank Paul Oregon of T&T Marketing,
Thank you, Joe.
M. Holland Company, David Lindsay of Borealis, and Dave Watson of Belden Alpha Wire for their great insights today into these
Thanks,
key
Joe.
trends and opportunities for the plastics industry and wire and cable. There's a lot more to discuss, obviously, in this area, but running out of time for today. But a lot to chew on as you go back to your offices and after this chat is over. We also appreciate your attendance at this Fireside Chat, fueled by M. Holland and produced by Plastics News. If you want to revisit this chat, the entire event will be archived on the live stream webinar section of plasticsnews.com. Again, this chat and the others in our continuing series can be found on our website. Thank you again for joining us, and we are grateful for your support of our series of Fireside Chats throughout the year. Look for the next in our series of Fireside Chats, fueled by M. Holland Company and produced by Plastics News, coming up. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.